Hello again, my name is William Pye, and in this video we will introduce terms and predicates. Although the logic of sentences provides a foundation for argumentation, it cannot symbolize well arguments where the premises are linked below the level of the sentence. Therefore, we will start the development of another flavor of logic, what's known as quantified logic. The preceding 9 episodes have developed the logic of sentences, what's known as sentential logic, propositional logic, or truth-functional logic in references such as the 2 versions of the Magnus book as well as the Gensler book. However, some intuitively true arguments are invalid in sentential logic, showing that it is insufficient, sadly. Thus, a new system of logic will be devised, what's known as quantified logic, predicate logic, or first-order logic in the same 3 references. To illustrate the problem with sentential logic, let's consider the example below. This is actually a classical example, but I referenced the Gensler book here for this particular example. The first premise is Socrates is human. The second premise is all humans are mortal. And the conclusion is, therefore, Socrates is mortal. So, let's represent the sentences above and see how this falls out. The first premise is a simple clause, a simple sentence, which can't be broken down, which I'll designate as P, Socrates is human. Similarly, the second premise, all humans are mortal, is also a simple sentence, a single clause, which I'll designate as Q. The conclusion, likewise, is also simple. It is Socrates is mortal, and I'll designate that one R. Therefore, the argument would be the following. You have P, Q, therefore R. However, while this argument may seem obviously true, the argument form is actually invalid, and here's how you show that. Actually look at the implication. Conjunction of the 2 premises imply the conclusion, so P conjunction with Q implies R. Is this a tautology? Is this a valid argument in sentential logic? And sadly, no. Look at the case specifically where P is true, Q is true, and R is false. True conjunction with true will be true, but true implies false will be false. This is not a tautology, this is not a valid argument in sentential logic. So, now, is this some kind of outlier that you can just ignore? And sadly, no. Similar examples with similar form can be found in the Magnus book, and the Suppus book, and a lot of different places. This is actually a well-known problem with sentential logic. So, what is the problem? What is actually the issue? Well, the primary issue here is that sentential logic, as the name implies, operates on the level of sentences. So remember, as we pointed out, P, Q, and R were all single clauses, simple sentences. P said that Socrates is human. Q said that all humans are mortal. R said that Socrates is therefore mortal. So, what's going on here is that each of these was a simple sentence. You couldn't break them down any further, and as sentences, they didn't have direct connections to each other. So what is the connection? Well, the connection between the premises and conclusion is at the level of the parts of speech themselves. Again, Socrates is human. Humans are mortal. What's the connection? The word human, the noun human is there. So that's the connection. Consequently, the grammar of these sentences must be addressed to actually link these 2 sentences together to give you the conclusion. To improve the system of sentential logic, the sentence itself will need to be fractured into smaller components, what are known as the parts of speech. As such, more fine grammatical notions will be necessary, things like the noun, pronoun, the adjective, and the preposition. Briefly also, the topics of subjects and predicates from episode 1 will be reviewed as necessary. A key part of speech is the noun, which is defined as follows. You have a noun is a word that simply names something. Now, there are actually 2 varieties of noun that we have to distinguish. First is the proper noun, which is the name of a particular person, place, or a thing. On the other hand, you have a common noun, which is the name of any one of a class of persons, places, or things. To illustrate the difference, let's consider 2 examples. First, you have William Pye, which is a proper noun that refers specifically to your host du jour, which is me. On the other hand, you have the noun cat. Now, cat could refer to my cat Cinnamon, it could refer to my friend's cat Toast, or it could refer to the stray cats that are sitting outside. Consequently, this is a common noun because it could refer to any of those individuals. Just as important will be the pronoun, which actually serves many different roles in grammar. At its simplest, a pronoun is a word that is used in place of a noun. Since it replaces something else, the thing it replaces is known as the antecedent. The antecedent of a pronoun is the word to which the pronoun refers. Now, the first example that most people run across of pronouns are the personal pronouns. A personal pronoun is a pronoun that shows by its form whether it refers to the person speaking, the person spoken to, or the person or thing that is spoken of. So, let's consider a few examples of this. Let's consider a few example sentences. First, we have the sentence, William Pye wrote the slide, and he is narrating the presentation. The pronoun he refers to William Pye in this case, specifically me. I wrote the slide and I am narrating the presentation. For a second example, Naoirse Rowe wields a scythe and an instructor mentored her. The her in this case refers back to Naoirse Rowe over here, a female character that I came up with for a story that I wrote. Likewise, we also have the members of the band enjoy jamming and the instruments are theirs. The pronoun theirs is actually both plural and genitive. So it's plural because the thing it refers to is actually plural as well, but also it's genitive showing that something belongs. Specifically, the instruments belong to someone, and the someone they belong to actually are the members of the band in this case. A pronoun can also mirror the subject within the same clause or intensify its antecedent. What we call a reflexive pronoun is a pronoun that refers or reflects back to the subject. On the other hand, an emphatic or intensive pronoun is used to give added emphasis to a noun or pronoun already existing in the sentence. For example, let's consider these sentences. First we have, William Pye wrote this slide himself. The himself refers back to William Pye, but what's going on here is William Pye wrote, but he didn't write himself. He wrote this slide. Consequently, the himself is just emphasizing that William Pye did the writing. He did it by himself. He did it alone. So this is an intensive or emphatic use of this pronoun. On the other hand, Naoirse Rowe taught herself about non-normal energy types. The herself refers back to Naoirse Rowe, but what's happening here is Naoirse did the teaching, but she also received the teaching as well. This is the reflexive case, where not only is she going to do the teaching, she's also receiving the teaching. Now, these two examples also illustrate that the himself and herself pronoun, as well as themselves in other cases, can be used multiple ways. They're polysemous. They have multiple uses. So be aware of context. Context will be your guide in how the words are being used. When the antecedent is unknown, a pronoun is utilized to formulate questions about that unknown entity. What are known as interrogative pronouns are used in asking these questions. In English, many of these words start with the letter W, as you'll see down below. Let's look at a couple examples of these. For example, what left the tracks in the soil? I don't know what entity, creature, or machine did this action of leaving tracks in the soil, but whatever it is, the word what is referring to the thing that actually did that action. Same thing with who. Who wrote the Holy Chronicle? What person actually wrote the Holy Chronicle? I don't know who it is, but the word who is referring to that individual. Same thing with whom. Whom did Naoirse teach about energy types? Who received her teaching? Which of the siblings has blonde hair? So I have a selection of siblings. Which of them has blonde hair? Whose is the cat roaming in the kitchen? So this is a question about possession. Who owns the cat that is roaming around in the kitchen? To point out or demonstrate a particular pronoun arises what's called a demonstrative pronoun. A demonstrative pronoun points out definitive persons, places, or things. For instance, let's consider this. This is a presentation. So the this that I'm referring to is the presentation that's actively going on right now. The presentation you're watching right now. So the this refers to the presentation. That is a microphone, so I'm pointing directly at that, which is referring to the microphone. The that is referring to the microphone in the sentence as well. These are action figures, so these guys right here are action figures. And in the sentence, indeed, the these refers to the action figures in the sentence. Likewise, those are books back there on my shelf. So in the sentence, the those refers to the books that are on the shelf behind me. To discuss a family of nouns, a more vague pronoun is needed. What's called an indefinite pronoun does not point out particular places, persons, or things. For instance, something is standing outside the window. Everyone loves ice cream. Nobody does their taxes for fun. Few read fan fiction. Many collect books. In each of these cases, the statement is more vague or general. No particular individual is pointed out. These pronouns will be incredibly important moving forward. Before moving forward, recall the notions of a subject and a predicate. The subject is the word or group of words that tells what or whom the speaker or writer is talking about. The predicate is the part of the sentence that makes a statement about the subject. Now, a clause is a group of words that has a subject and a predicate. An independent clause does not depend upon anything else for its meaning, and a subordinate or dependent clause cannot stand alone. Therefore, a simple sentence consists of one and only one independent clause. Now, I go back over these because clauses themselves can be used in place of nouns, adverbs, and other parts of speech. As one might imagine, a noun clause is a subordinate clause that functions as a noun. An adverbial clause is a subordinate clause that functions as an adverb. Now, I bring up all this talk of clauses because very often these clauses are introduced with a particular type of pronoun, what's called a relative pronoun. A relative pronoun is a pronoun that joins the clause which it introduces to its own antecedent. For instance, let's consider these sentences here. Ne'er she spoke to who would listen. In this case, who would listen is describing those ne'er she is speaking to, that is, those who would listen. Hence, who would listen is a noun clause describing the object of the preposition to. For the next sentence, that the idea came to my head amazes me. That the idea came into my head actually is the subject of this sentence, making it also a noun clause. Now, notice that who was used as an interrogative pronoun previously, and that was used as a demonstrative pronoun previously. Thus, both of these words are polysemous, now serving as relative pronouns here. For a final example, William wrote the slides when he had time. When he had time is actually an adverbial clause here, describing the time when the slides were written. Now, notably, when is not serving as a pronoun here, it's serving as a subordinate conjunction. So keep in mind that just because you have a subordinate clause doesn't necessarily mean you have a relative pronoun in play. The next part of speech to discuss would be the adjective. An adjective is a word which adds new ideas to nouns and pronouns. For instance, consider this. Brown hair. Brown is describing the color of my hair, thus it is describing my hair further, making it a descriptive adjective. Two shirts is listing off the number of shirts that I have, consequently it is a numerical adjective. Some shoes is stating that there's some quantity of shoes. It's indeterminate, but it's actually stating that there is a quantity to talk about, hence this is a quantitative adjective. Every person, I have a group of people, and I'm talking about every person in that group, distinguishing each particular one. Hence, this is a distributive adjective, distributing the meaning of the sentence to every single person in the group. An American car, well, America is a proper noun. Consequently, I've modified it here to become a proper adjective. Our dog, well, this is describing that this dog is owned by someone. Consequently, this is a possessive adjective. That idea is pointing out a particular idea, consequently it is a demonstrative adjective. Lastly, we have which cat. Which cat is this is asking a question. Consequently, this is an interrogative adjective. Now, notably, some of these words we've used before, like someone, everyone, ours, that, which. Each of these has served the purpose as a pronoun before, but can also be used as an adjective. Hence, they are also polysemous. Of all adjectives, a select few are designated as what are called articles. So a definite article is an adjective that points out a particular object. On the other hand, an indefinite article is an adjective that indicates no particular object. In English, there's only 3 of these. And to give some examples, take for example this one. You have the cat. So the is the article in this case, and it's particularly talking about the cat, this particular cat. Thus, this is a definite article. On the other hand, you have a dog. Well, a is talking about a dog, a singular dog, but no particular dog of interest, so this would be an indefinite article. You have an idea. Well, an idea talks about an idea, but not a particular idea. So, thus, what happens is this is an indefinite article. Now, the only real difference between a and an is that traditionally a is put before a consonant, as opposed to an, which is put before a vowel. Otherwise, they're basically interchangeable. The only difference is the definite, and a and an are the two indefinite. Now, in other languages, for example like Spanish or German, the article actually plays more of a role with the declension of the noun, but English unfortunately doesn't have that particular trapping. Now, for our purposes with logic, as with indefinite pronouns, articles will be actually quite important moving forward. As with nouns and adverbs, clauses can also function as adjectives. So, an adjective clause is a subordinate clause that functions as an adjective. For instance, let's consider these sentences here. The scientists who researched exotic energy types extended their work. So who researched exotic energy types is a subordinate clause, and it describes specifically the scientists. In the main clause, the scientists extended their work. Notice that the clause in white stands perfectly well on its own, but the blue clause has to be connected to something, specifically the scientists in this question. Likewise, the philosopher whose work is in this book has long since passed. So, whose work is in this book describes the philosopher in the main clause of the philosopher has long since passed. Likewise, the researcher with whom Naomi discussed her ideas listened intently. With whom Naomi discussed her ideas is a subordinate clause which describes the researcher in the main clause. The researcher listened intently. Now notice that all of these subordinate clauses have a relative pronoun, who, whose, and whom in these cases. Entire clauses are not always needed to convey some relationships, which is where we start talking about what are called phrases. So a phrase is a group of words without subject or predicate that functions as some other single part of speech. And specifically, we're going to be talking about what are called prepositional phrases. So a preposition is a word that shows a relation between its object and some other word in the sentence, and the prepositional phrase consists of the preposition and its object. Now, much like clauses, prepositional phrases come in different varieties, like adverbial and adjectival. So we'll start with adjectival first. An adjective phrase is a prepositional phrase that modifies a noun or pronoun. Again, it acts like an adjective would. So, for instance, let's consider a few examples. The book on the shelf has a hard cover. The preposition here is on, and its object is shelf, so on the shelf would be my adjectival phrase, which modifies the noun book. Likewise, William has not met the King of England. The preposition here is of, its object will be England, making the prepositional phrase of England, which happens to modify the noun king in this case. Likewise, prepositional phrases can perform as adverbs. So, an adverbial phrase is a prepositional phrase that modifies a verb, adjective, or adverb. It basically acts like an adverb does. So, for a couple examples, let's consider a couple sentences here. So, the book fell from the shelf. So, from is my preposition here. Its object is shelf, so from the shelf will be my prepositional phrase. And it's adverbial because it describes how the book fell. It fell from the shelf. Likewise, we have Naomi wrote quizzes with haste. So my preposition here is with, its object is haste, so with haste will be my prepositional phrase, and it's adverbial because it describes how she wrote the quizzes. She wrote the quizzes quickly, i.e. with haste. Now consider some aspects of verbs as well as the structure of the predicate itself. As seen in previous examples, there are some verbs that actually transfer action from the subject to some other entity in the sentence, and we want to give that entity a name, what's called the object of a verb. In this case, the direct object. The direct object of a verb names the receiver of that action, but it's not the only object that a verb can have. The indirect object of a verb names to whom the action is directed or for whom the action is performed. Basically, who benefits. Now, since some verbs will take an object and others will not, we separate them into two distinct classes. A transitive verb takes a direct object. It's the one that actually transfers that action from the subject to the object. On the other hand, an intransitive verb does not take a direct object. It doesn't transfer action from the subject to some other type of object. Now, let's actually do a couple examples of this and actually look at this in practice. So, Naomi wrote her dissertation. The verb here is wrote. The subject here is Naomi. She's the one who's doing the writing, but who is receiving the writing? Well, her dissertation is receiving the writing. Thus, it would be the direct object. Her dissertation is the direct object of the verb wrote, meaning that wrote is a transitive verb in this case. For a second example, William gave her a gift. The verb here is gave. William's the subject. He's the one who's doing the giving. However, what is receiving the giving? What is actually being given? Well, the gift is receiving the action of being given. It is what's being given. So it's the direct object, meaning that gave is indeed a transitive verb. But who's receiving the gift? For who is benefiting here? Well, her. Her is benefiting. So we have a direct object, the gift, and an indirect object, that is her. For a final example, the cat ran quickly. The verb here is ran. The subject here is cat, that's the one who's doing the running. Quickly, however, is an adverb. The adverb is actually describing how the running is happening. There is nothing here that is receiving the action of running. Nothing receives the action of running. So this verb here is actually intransitive. Ran does not actually take a direct object. One particular intransitive verb will be crucial in describing properties, what's called a linking verb. So a linking verb serves as a link which joins the subject to some other word in the predicate that gives meaning to the overall sentence. Now, that word in the predicate can vary. It can be a predicate noun, which renames or explains the subject. You can have a predicate adjective, which actually modifies the subject, or a predicate pronoun, which functions the same way as the subject itself. So here's an example of each of these three cases. First, we have William was a student. The linking verb here is was, and it links William to being a student at some point in his past, basically explaining his status. So this would be a predicate noun that re-explains or gives context to the subject. On the other hand, ne'er she is kind. The linking verb here is, and it links the subject ne'er she to the aspect of being kind. So this would be an example of a predicate adjective. And lastly, this is he. So the subject here is this, the linking verb here is, and the predicate pronoun would be he in this case. With the grammatical notions at the ready, their analogs in logic will be established. Specifically, we will have domain, constant, variable, and predicate. These will be central building blocks of quantified logic, which will augment and expand upon sentential logic. First, one should state the group of items being considered in a given argument. That is, we should state the domain. The domain is the collection of things we are talking about. Alternate terms for this include domain of discourse, domain of individuals, or universe of discourse. Now, we've already had a few domains mentioned in passing, so let's go ahead and state them for the record. We have the collection of all living people. We also have the collection of all fictional characters. And we also have the collection of all animals on Earth as well. Next, each individual within the domain should be able to be designated. That is, I should be able to name them. A name in logic is a symbol used to pick out exactly one object of the domain. Alternate words for this include singular term or individual constant. In mathematics, I often use the term constant more often than not. But either way, the idea is very similar to that of a proper noun. If I give you someone's proper name, that should uniquely identify who I'm talking about, and a constant should work basically the same way. We've already had a few names, so let's actually look at them in context here. In the domain of people living currently on Earth, you have me, William Pye, in which case you can denote me with a lowercase a. In the domain of all fictional characters, you have my character, Ne'er She Wrote, who could be designated with a lowercase b. And in the domain of animals on Earth, you have my cat Cinnamon, who could be designated with a lowercase c. And this is the convention usually taken, that the consonants are designated with lowercase italic letters from the beginning of the English alphabet. But keep in mind that other people have different conventions, so pay very close attention to how the paper you're reading is actually defining their consonants as they go. On the other hand, say one wishes to discuss an arbitrary, non-specific individual. This is where we introduce the notion of a variable. A variable or general term is a symbol standing for no particular object in the domain. The idea here is this is analogous to the pronoun. A pronoun stands for a noun, a variable stands for some element of the domain, some name that may not be immediately declared. So here are some examples of declaring variables. So in the domain of people currently living on Earth, I could let little x be a person currently living on Earth, just some arbitrary person in that domain. In the domain of all fictional characters, I could let y be some arbitrary fictional character. In the domain of animals on Earth, I could let z be an animal on Earth, some arbitrary animal chosen on Earth. And again, the convention here is to take lowercase italic letters from the end of the English alphabet rather than the beginning. As constants and variables perform very similar purposes, much like proper nouns and common nouns do, a single word is often used to group the two notions together. That is a term. A term is either a constant or a variable. It's basically the same idea as how noun actually groups together proper nouns and common nouns. A term groups together constants and variables. Now, turning our attention over to predicates, in grammar, a predicate makes a statement about the subject, plain and simple. However, in logic, a predicate makes a statement relating its terms together, so it's not quite the same thing. Explicitly, a predicate or relation symbol is a symbol used to represent a property or a relation. And again, here's where I throw out a big warning. The usage of the word predicate in logic is not quite the same as it is in grammar, which is something we want to highlight with the following examples. First, let's start with a traditional grammatical predicate to get this started. So let's consider the sentence, a person has blonde hair. The common noun person is going to be where I'm going to place my variable. So I'm going to represent the sentence in the following way. Where I have person, I'm going to put the variable x. So the domain of x will be people currently living on Earth. Persons, basically. So, in which case, if I put x in that place, I have x has blonde hair, which I will denote as b of x, which is your traditional functional way of doing predicates. So b of x is x has blonde hair. This is indeed a traditional grammatical predicate. However, this is not the only way I can do this. Consider this particular sentence, William loves her. Where I see her, which is the pronoun in this sentence, I'm going to replace that with a variable, specifically y. So let's represent the sentence in the following way. With the variable y, its domain will be women currently living on Earth. So the domain for y is women currently living on Earth. The predicate then will be William loves y, which I will denote as L of y. William loves y. Notice, this is not a traditional grammatical predicate. It doesn't make a statement about the subject. Instead, it's making a statement about the object, who is loved by William, is what it's really saying here. So this is something to point out. Grammatical predicates can indeed become logical predicates, but logical predicates are actually a more broad family than just grammatical predicates. I don't have to restrict my attention to direct objects either. So consider this sentence, there she gave someone the present. The pronoun in this sentence is someone, which is the indirect object of gave. So that's where I'm going to put my variable this time. So let's represent the sentence in the following way. My variable here will be z, and since there she is fictional, the someone here is going to be fictional also. So the domain for z will be fictional characters. My predicate, what I'm going to call p of z, will be the following. There she gave z the present, so p of z will be there she gave z the present, giving me my predicate here. But I can also do this with objects of prepositions also. So there she collaborated with no one. No one is my pronoun here, so I'm going to represent the sentence in the following way. The no one will be represented by w, so the domain here will be also again fictional characters, so the domain of w will be fictional characters. So I can represent this predicate in the following way. There she collaborated with w, giving me c of w, there she collaborated with w. I can also build a predicate from a reflexive pronoun just as much. So let's consider the sentence, every person is themselves. I want to represent the sentence in the following way. The common noun person I'll represent with a lowercase t. The domain for t will be all persons who are currently living on Earth, so the domain for t is people living currently on Earth. So let's look at the predicate. I'll call this z of t. Every person, so every t, so t is themselves, but themselves refers back to the subject, which is t. So z of t would be t is t, giving me a predicate with a reflexive property to it. But here's the thing. This particular example actually gives me a demonstration of having two variables appear simultaneously, which is what the next example is going to expound upon very heavily, because they can also differ in domain. So let's consider this sentence. Every actor portrays some character. Let's represent this sentence this way. So every actor, well, I'm going to represent that with a lowercase u. The domain for u will be every actor who is currently working. So the domain for u is actors who are currently working, all right? But they portray some character. So this particular noun I'm going to represent with a v, and the domain for v will be fictional characters. So domain for v will be fictional characters. Notice I now have two variables to work with. My particular predicate here, which I'm going to call a of u comma v, is going to be the following. Every u portrays some v. So u portrays v will be my predicate here, giving me an example of a predicate that not only has two different variables, but has two different domains to keep track of as well. So far, the following types of pronouns have been used to create predicates. You have personal pronouns, you have reflexive pronouns, and you have indefinite pronouns. Likewise, the indefinite article with a common noun can build a predicate as well. Intensive pronouns merely emphasize their antecedent, which does not affect the truth value of the statement. Interrogative pronouns, on the other hand, are used to create questions, not declarative statements. Therefore, neither play a role into building predicates. However, what can be said about the following types of pronouns? Demonstrative and relative pronouns. Moreover, does the definite article modify a statement in any way, shape, or form? These lingering questions will linger a little bit longer as we start through quantified logic. And that's where we'll stop for today. Next time we'll introduce quantifiers to complete these predicates into full sentences. Below is a list of references for today's video. We have Gensler's Introduction to Logic, we have Magnus's For All X, we have another version of Magnus's For All X from the Open Logic project. We also have Semmelmeyer and Bolander's New Webster's Grammar Guide, we have Suppes and Hill's First Course in Mathematical Logic, and we have Suppes' Introduction to Logic. If you like today's video, go ahead and hit the like button below. If you have a comment or question, go ahead and leave that below as well, and we'll respond to you as soon as we can. Thank you for your time, and we'll see you next time. See you then!